A stranger in a grey coat knocked on the door. He would not give his name. He handed over a sealed letter, a sum of money, and a single request. Write a mass for the dead. Tell no one who asked. Mozart took the job. He was dead before he could finish it. His name was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. He was born on the 27th of January, 1756 in Salzburg, a small church-ruled city in what is now Austria. His father, Leopold Mozart, was a professional violinist at the court of the Prince Archbishop. His mother, Anna Maria, had already buried 5 children. Only 2 would survive infancy, Wolfgang and his older sister, Maria Anna, known in the family as Nannerl. Nannerl was the first prodigy in the house. She began keyboard lessons at 7. Her little brother, watching from the floor, started picking out thirds on the keyboard before he was 4. By 5, he was composing small pieces his father wrote down for him. By 6, Leopold had realized what he had, and Leopold made a decision that would define his son's entire life. He took the children on the road. From 1762 onward, the Mozart family traveled. Munich, Vienna, Paris, London, The Hague. They played for Empress Maria Theresa. They played for King George III. They played for the French court at Versailles. Contemporary accounts describe a small boy in a wig and silk coat, sight-reading concertos placed in front of him, improvising on any theme shouted from the audience, playing keyboards with a cloth draped over the keys so he could not see his own hands. It was astonishing. It was also exhausting. Wolfgang fell seriously ill several times on these tours. Typhoid fever in the Netherlands, smallpox in Moravia. His childhood, in any normal sense, didn't exist. He was a traveling exhibit. By his teens, the novelty began to fade. A child prodigy is a marvel. A 20-year-old prodigy is just another musician. And the job market for musicians in the 1770s was brutal. Mozart worked as a court musician back in Salzburg, under the new Prince Archbishop Hieronymus von Colloredo. He hated it. The pay was small, the work was restrictive, and Colloredo had no interest in Wolfgang's ambitions beyond church music and table music. In 1777, Mozart took a long leave and went looking for a better position: Munich, Mannheim, and eventually Paris. Paris went badly. He couldn't find a stable post. And in July 1778, his mother, who had traveled with him, fell ill and died in a rented room on the Rue du Gros Chenet. Mozart was 22. He wrote the news home in pieces, first saying she was very sick, then, days later, telling the truth. He came back to Salzburg. He lasted 2 more years under Colloredo. Then, in the spring of 1781, everything broke. The Archbishop was visiting Vienna, and he demanded Mozart travel with him and perform as part of his entourage. Mozart by then had tasted what Vienna could offer. He asked to be released from service. The Archbishop refused. For weeks, Mozart pushed. Finally, on the 9th of June, 1781, the Archbishop's chamberlain, a man named Count Arco, threw him out of the room. Mozart later wrote that Arco hurls me out of the room and gives me a kick on my behind. He was, at last, free. He stayed in Vienna. He married Constanze Weber the next year. And over the next 10 years, working as an independent composer, not for a church, not for a court, but for whoever would pay, he produced a body of work that would change music. Here is what he did, in plain terms. Before Mozart, a symphony was often polite, balanced, predictable, a conversation in a drawing room. Opera, especially comic opera, was light entertainment. Mozart took those forms and gave them something new. Real human beings. In The Marriage of Figaro, in 1786, servants outwit their masters, and women outthink the men around them. And the music itself shows you each character's inner life, moment by moment. In Don Giovanni, a year later, comedy and horror share the same stage. In the late symphonies, numbers 39, 40 and 41, written in a single summer in 1788, he packed grief, triumph and mathematical counterpoint into music that still sounds, more than 2 centuries later, startlingly alive. He was enormously productive, and he was enormously successful for a time. In 1787, Emperor Joseph II appointed him imperial and royal chamber composer. The salary was 800 florins a year, a respectable middle-class income, roughly equivalent to about $100,000 today. Mozart himself complained it was too much for what I do, too little for what I could do. It was a part-time post. He was meant to write dances for the court balls. He was not poor. This is worth saying clearly because the legend gets this wrong. Mozart earned real money in Vienna. The problem was what he did with it. He lived well. He rented expensive apartments. He owned a billiard table. He kept a horse. He and Constanze had medical bills. She was repeatedly ill, and they lost 4 of their 6 children in infancy. And when, in 1788, Vienna entered a long war with the Ottoman Empire, the city's aristocracy stopped commissioning concerts. Mozart's main income dried up. He began borrowing, from friends, from a fellow Freemason named Michael Puchberg, in letter after letter asking for just a little more, just until the next concert. By the summer of 1791, his finances were recovering. He had written The Magic Flute. He had a new opera commissioned for Prague, and one day that summer, a stranger arrived at his apartment, a grey-cloaked messenger, refusing to give his employer's name, commissioning a Requiem Mass, a Mass for the dead, and paying half the fee up front. The commission, we now know, came from a Count Franz von Wolzek, an amateur musician who liked to pass famous composers' work off as his own. At the time, Mozart did not know that. He took the job. He began writing. He never finished it. In November 1791, Mozart fell seriously ill. The exact cause of his death is still debated by historians. Rheumatic fever, kidney failure, and streptococcal infection are the leading theories, but the legend that he was poisoned by the rival composer Salieri is not supported by evidence. He lay in bed, feverish and swollen, dictating passages of the Requiem to his student, Franz Xaver Süssmayr. He died just after midnight on the 5th of December, 1791. He was 35 years old. His funeral, on the 7th of December, was a standard third-class burial under the burial reforms Emperor Joseph II had decreed in 1784, simple, unmarked, outside the city walls, in St. Mark's Cemetery. It was not a pauper's grave. It was the ordinary burial of an ordinary Viennese citizen. No one wrote down the exact spot. To this day, nobody knows precisely where he lies. Constanze later had the Requiem completed by Süssmayr and delivered to Count Wolzek, who conducted it at a memorial service for his own dead wife, and briefly claimed it as his own composition. So how does the most famous composer in Europe end up in an unmarked grave? Not through tragedy, not through poisoning, not through poverty in the way we imagine it. He ends up there because that was simply what the regulations of his city demanded, for everyone who wasn't a noble. That was the ending for the man. It was not the ending for the music, because the music kept going. The Requiem was finished and performed and copied and carried across Europe. The Magic Flute ran for hundreds of nights. Figaro and Don Giovanni never left the stage. A boy who played for empresses, a composer who remade his art. 35 years, 600 works, and more than 2 centuries later, somewhere in the world, every single hour of every single day, someone is playing Mozart. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe for more.